Probably we can describe all kinds of things.
You're right.
Good morning. I think we're live. It says on air on my little screen here.
Excellent.
Get my chat over here. So if you're joining us, we invite you to say hello in the chat, whether you're coming to us by way of Facebook or YouTube or whatever the other ways are one might find their way into this conversation. But we're glad to have you. We'll wait a few minutes here. We might even give you an extra minute after 9. We were having a little bit of connectivity problems, as they say. But we're going to have a conversation this morning about music and how that might intersect or participate in our spiritual lives as Christians. And we have the Venerable Mimsy Jones, Paul McLean, and Heidi Rupke on the team this morning.
Representing lay people everywhere.
Well, metaphorically, all of us are lay people with regard to the subject at hand. I think that's
true.
Amen to that, brother.
Good morning, and Ruthie and Kendra and David Johnson. Good to see your names scrolling up. The impetus for the topic, of course, is this is the final week of Lenten preaching this year. Heidi, you want to tell us what's up?
I do. I'm very excited that on Wednesday at noon and at 6:30 we get to welcome Kirk Whalum. This is his own. He just came back into town, and he is excited to join us on Wednesday. I have to figure out how to get him his to-go waffle because that is something that he very much looks forward to. But he will be playing, talking, and I'm sure full of a few surprises because his mind is a beautiful thing. And then on Friday, for our very last Lenten preaching of this year, we have Rabbi Micah Greenstein from Temple Israel. So I think he's going on 20 years at Lenten preaching series. So maybe our longest running, who is currently participating, Lenten preacher.
Wow. Other than Dan Matthews.
Other than Dan, yeah.
Second place, you're right. I mean.
Yeah. And
it's the bookend. Perfect.
Yeah.
Beginning and end. Alpha and Omega.
He's only 20 years or so behind Dan.
Yes. We can all aspire to that kind of longevity.
Good morning, Linda Gale. Well, out of necessity, we don't have our professional, accomplished musicians around these parts. Well, Linda Gale, I see she's come in. She is quite an accomplished musician. But as far as on staff, Kristen can't be here because she's preparing the choir for worship this morning. And so in one sense, that's unfortunate. On the other hand, I thought it gives us an opportunity to come at a topic like music as amateurs. Robert Capon is a favorite author of mine and interpreter of the parables and cooking writer and all the stuff. He was a priest, Episcopal priest. And he has a lovely piece on what it means to be an amateur and notes that amateur has the same root. It's a lover.
Yeah.
Has the same root of amore and of loving. And so what we lack in actual knowledge and musical skill, I hope we can bring some affection to. And I think there's something helpful about, of course, music depends on a lot of people who aren't trained in it to actually be a cultural phenomenon and a force in all of our lives. So here we are coming at the topic. And I'll tell you, it was, of course, because Kirk was coming this week that I thought, well, let me dig around and find something to provoke a little bit of conversation about some intersection between music and spirituality. And if you say music and Christianity, the interweb is so big, it's hard. So I stumbled upon a HuffPost article that's okay. So, but it has some things that coming at it from from different directions. But I'd like to start with y'all just asking about earliest memories of music, or poignant early memories when music kind of was became a part of your life.
So, I mean, if you have been here for other weeks, you'll know that I've talked a little bit about my Calvinist upbringing.
Mhm.
Calvinism of its many questioned and answered catechism, and the theology that can be explained with the acronym of TULIP. And but one of the things that I really maybe I didn't know how to appreciate at the time, but I do now. Part of my religious upbringing was the singing, and where I come from and where my parents still live. It's kind of more of the exception to the rule to not be in band or choir or both. Our majority of the kids study music through school, and then as they go out into the community, they have retained that knowledge and that the understanding of music. And so when I go back to visit my parents in Northwest Iowa, there are several very important points that I have departed from their theology on, but something that I really appreciate is almost always during a service, the organ will just cut out for a verse or two, and we'll be left with an entire congregation singing a cappella 4-part harmony, and they seem to not notice that they're doing it. There's these farmers, these small business people, these kids, these college students, and it's just amazing to be in that sort of a buzz, and I love to be part of that. So I think that's been a part of my life for many years, and I've learned to cherish that more as I've gotten older.
That's lovely. It's very much as a participatory art, not a one to be observed and to be kind of carried along by other voices and generations. Yeah, I can resonate with that a lot. What about you other two? Any come to mind?
For me, one of my earliest memories is hearing the song "Jesus Loves Me," and my mom may have sung that to me, or my grandmother. And Ruthie just noted that my mom was our grade school music teacher and was the church pianist and organist. And so, like a lot of kids, I tended to rebel against that. My mom so much wanted to teach me piano when I was young, and I got through Chopsticks and the Mexican Hat Dance. And that's as far as I went.
I bet you could still play them, though.
Well, maybe. But looking back, I regret that now. And but yeah, it was the hearing that Jesus loves me. I think as a child, just that affirming message, I think was powerful, and knowing that, and kind of gave me an introduction. I didn't really know fully who Jesus was, the association with Jesus with God, but it was something very affirming that I heard early on. And like you were saying, Heidi, the Southern Baptist tradition has a lot of Calvinist theology that that kind of goes against some of that, but that Jesus loves me message still stayed with me. I think even in hearing some of the darker theology of Calvinism.
Yes, the T of TULIP stands for total depravity. Just to
I know.
There's not too many songs about that, though.
What about you, Mimsy?
Well, I was remembering when Paul said Jesus loves me, my grandmother, who really taught me just about anything I knew about the Bible. We were not exactly church goers, and I would spend a lot of weekends with her, and she would take me to her Presbyterian church. But I just can remember her. She talked about the disciples as if they were her friends. I remember she was really my anchor about many, many things. But I think she probably taught me Jesus loves me. And then actually I was raised as so to speak, as a Presbyterian. So I remember joining the choir at this Presbyterian church in Knoxville. And I had a big crush on the tenor, who was just wonderful, I thought. And so I sang in that choir. And I have no musicians in my family. But I became very, very, I learned piano lessons. In those days, the piano teacher came to your house, and she took all the music that was popular at that time and adapted it for the piano for one player. And so I could go into any gathering and sit down and play Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and all these wonderful, wonderful. I was kind of the entertainer there for a few years, and then it subsided. But it's never left me. And Scott, thank you so much for bringing all these memories back to me and this appreciation for music.
Thanks for sharing them. Yeah, I don't have many early memories. Just very few. I don't have very many recent memories, frankly. I ask Ardell, but I have a memory of this musical mobile that would hang over the crib on my brother's bed. So I'm sure it was my brother. We had passed it down, and some reason the sound of it is vivid. And also, I guess the other one, somewhat related to some of yours, is that my mom also played the organ. And the piano. We had a Kimball organ, electric organ, in the living room. And when my dad was a pastor, but his day job was he was a Bible professor, and so every now and then he'd be asked to preach in these little country churches. And I remember one, House Savoy, between Siloam Springs, little white clapboard church between Fayetteville and Siloam Springs in the country. And they would always ask if Linda would play the organ. They'd be so happy if Linda would come play the organ, And so I have some of those memories. It's poignant because Mom, as some of you know, developed multiple sclerosis, and it began to take these things away. But music is one of the, especially an organ, which requires all of, well, I still can't. I watch Kristen and I'm just in awe to see her feet and several keyboards and all of this and pulling stops and whatnot. So those are some early memories for me too. Well, I wonder about moving ahead a little bit, and I mean Heidi's already crept into this. Are there poignant moments when, maybe not in church, to start with, when music struck you as I don't know, transcendent is a big vague word, but you know what I mean? I mean, I don't know how to. You can define it as you will, but something in the experience of music in a moment, for whatever reason, transported you in a way that's stayed with you. Did any come to mind when I sent you the prompt?
Nothing came to me. Well,
go ahead, Mimsy. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just, I wrote a note to myself when I thought, no, nothing has. But in the same line that I was discussing about this popular music, I became just, I guess, transfixed by musicals like Guys and Dolls and Brigadoon. And I just loved, I knew all the songs by heart. And West Side Story was another one that I just adored. So mine was more secular. Well, that was completely secular, but
that's what I was looking for.
Okay, well, those were mine.
Well, and if you think about a musical, is there anything that requires a willing suspension of disbelief more than a musical? Right? You just have to, you have to jump over and oh, people sing to each other, and that's the way that's what we do. So that is kind of transcendent, just in buying in and being captivated by a story that's presented that way. So that makes great sense to me. What about you? What about you other two?
Well, I got the community theater bug in the late 80s, early 90s, and I enjoyed acting, and I've always felt comfortable with my speaking voice, my radio voice, and all that. And but I asked the community theater. I said, well, I'd love to see us do a musical. And they said, well, no one's willing to take that on. And I was crazy enough to say, well, I'll direct one. I have no musical knowledge whatsoever. But I got the music director at a Methodist church to agree to be the musical director of the show. And the show I was drawn to was Oliver. And and I really wanted to do that show just really to hear that song, Where Is Love? An orphan just singing about his longing for family. But I think that song got into so many universal longings within me, longing for God, longing for belonging, longing for community, so many longings. Just it was just a deep. You could almost say the song, "Where is love? Where is God?" You know. But it was, and we cast a young man in the role who's just before his voice changed. So I'm so glad we did it that year because he had the perfect voice to carry out that song, and that's just such a fond memory. And I can still hear him singing it. Where is love? It was really powerful.
Wow, that's love. I love the connection with the boy because there's something ephemeral about music. It only reverberates in the air for a little while, and only different moments in our lives don't last forever. Our voices change. That's fantastic, Paul. What do you think, Heidi?
Well, I'm glad you all brought up musicals because I had forgotten this little bit until you mentioned Brigadoon and Oliver. But growing up, again, music was very important. So my family watched all of the Rodgers and Hammerstein musicals multiple times. And we were I was part of those productions in middle school and high school. And then I met Dave when I was about 25 and living in Washington, D.C. We were both in grad school. And Dave was also part of the CRC tradition and had some similar musical experiences. But when we first drove from Washington, D.C. to Michigan to meet his parents, at some point, Dave and I were both singing songs from Oklahoma together.
Oh, yeah.
David's dad says, as soon as he heard us singing Oklahoma, he knew that we were meant to be together. That was it.
In your Surrey?
Lovely. Yeah.
That's right.
But we were decades past performing in those musicals, but we both knew all the words and had a great time singing them.
Yeah, it's so interesting how, and this is why I think one of the reasons I just think the spiritual power of it is so fascinating and important to name. It's just the way that, music can lodge in us in a place that can carry it. It may carry the lyrics, but like when Paul, you were describing yours as well, it's the sense of the lyrics and the music itself can just span decades in a moment. When I started thinking about this, I probably went really sick, but I was all over the place when I started thinking about this outside the church. I mean, when I was in high school, I bought a big Pioneer stereo at Walmart, used all my savings for it, and had big speakers, and I got a copy of Who's Next, The Who, by the Who is the and Baba O'Reilly. I would put my headphones on, and I think Baba O'Reilly and Beast of Burden by the Rolling Stones have the best entrances of any songs ever written. And so I can go right back there as soon as it comes on the radio. I also kind of got in trouble when I didn't use my headphones and I turned it up too loud. And Dad came home early and I didn't expect him to catch me. But those were really, they were powerful. They were transcendent experiences with me of different kinds of music. But I also had them with Ardell, and I went and saw Dave Brubeck while he was alive, and Count Basie, and we went and saw Honey Boy Edwards at the King Biscuit Blues Festival, who must have been up in his 80s and just had a folding chair on a stage and a guitar, and that was all there was, and he just captivated us. We were at a bluegrass festival in Virginia when a a bluegrass band was playing a song about a rainstorm, and we were in a pavilion at the Shrinemont Episcopal Camp for the Bishop's Bluegrass Festival, and this rainstorms came over the hills, and all the walls were open, but we had a roof, and they just saw it and they just kicked it into high gear, and they were already singing the song. Anyway, all these little moments where there's an intersection of sound and place and where everyone was at that moment in their life, that there's a soundtrack. We end up having little soundtracks for our lives, is what it sounds like as y'all are talking. Well, let's bring it into church. I wanted to start there because I really think that all truth is God's truth. I really think that beauty is knit into the nature of things. So sometimes it's nice and helpful to start outside the predictable places where we might expect to find something holy and sacred. But what about in church? Where have there been places in your Heidi started with one, but where music moved you either in a way that's familiar or a way that was surprising and had to do, it was religious?
Well, Scott and Paul were both present on Friday at Lenten preaching when we heard Gavin, and I'm forgetting his last name at this moment.
Wigginson.
Gavin Wigginson, thank you, a tenor, give his live performance. And if you were able to watch it online, you maybe got an echo of what it was like to be in the presence of this powerful voice that kind of blasted me back in my pew. He filled up the whole church and more. And we have a large building. And I got chills all over just at, the beauty and the longing. He was singing about the river and those who've crossed over. And it's just, it was everything in this little package. It was love and life and death and separation and connection. And it's been so long since we've had live professional music that we could be in the presence of, that I felt just so honored. And again, I'm trying to think of a better word than blasted, but I almost felt that power of those sound waves hitting me like a physical force. It was also beautiful.
He was a presence. And I want to hang on to this as we keep going. You've alluded to some part of what his voice carried was some sadness, and there was a knowledge of suffering and tragedy too, and loss. Part of what was moving and what is moving, I think, in the best of music is the way that it acknowledges all aspects of our experiences, our lives. He certainly did. Yeah.
And if you haven't checked it out, you can hear an echo of it if you look at the recording.
Yeah. And I bet the recording will show you a bit of part of his presence was just presence too. Before he seemed to gather himself as gathering these resources and then let them. It was remarkable, truly remarkable. What about other thoughts, you?
For me, I agree on Gavin. It was just phenomenal. But and I've experienced that with our choir when they've done Wade in the Water, especially for and maybe a baptism Sunday. But something about that song, and Heidi, it was what you were alluding to too. It's sometimes it's when the organist, when the accompanist stop playing, and it's just the purity of the voices. The moment in that song that you experience that, and it's just amazing. You feel. I think that song helps me live out the prayer of baptism, more of the longing for deliverance, the longing for this communal experience of wading in the water, of belonging, of being cleansed, of hoping, and but especially that deliverance, but also it's the sadness too. Because one of the lines in the song is God's going to trouble the water. and but it's the you have light and dark, you have all of it all right there together. But it brings all the prayers that we say in baptism to life for me.
Fantastic. I have a painting by my sister-in-law of a river baptism on my wall. It doesn't look like an Episcopal baptism, but Ardell's grandfather was in it, and it moves me. Yeah, it's in a similar way, maybe. What do you think, Mimsy? Anything come to?
Well, yeah, what comes to my mind, it's much more, it's not quite so lively, but when I was a junior in high school, I wasn't in trouble and was sent away, but I went to a boarding school, and I didn't know a soul, not a girl, not a teacher, nothing. It was in Richmond, Virginia, and it was in the 50s. So, we were required to go to church at the Episcopal Church, and we had to wear hats and stockings before we could leave the building. We were checked, and we were at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church right across the street, so we could walk. Beautiful church. And as I told you, my spotty religion had been with the Presbyterian Church. And when I heard the organ, and then I don't remember the hymn that was used, but I had not been homesick. I had loved my first few days there, but I had this huge lump in my throat. And I've thought since then that I think I knew I belonged in that liturgy, in that tradition. It just did. It was just, I mean, when you mentioned that question, I thought, oh my God, Saint Stephen, I can still remember that. And it was music that did it. I don't remember a thing else about the preaching or the readings or anything. And then when my husband died, and he loved the sea, and I chose Immortal Father, Strong to Save, and Scott preached that incredible homily. But that was the only time that I choked up, was when they played Immortal, when we stood up to sing that. And so with me, I think the first thing I thought about was it makes me get in touch with my emotions. I cry more spontaneously with music, most particularly in church, not really otherwise, but to hear the organ, that's something about it. It's been meaningful.
I agree with, I love your naming that music can go skip right past the head and grab the emotions. I too, if I'm tearing up in church, it's almost always because there's a musical element that has a memory. I mean, one of them, it reminds me, you're mentioning a funeral. At my mother's funeral, we sang "Oh, for a Thousand Tongues to Sing," and with her MS, the last line, not I guess one of the verses, not the last verse. Hear him, ye dead, you voiceless ones. Ye blind, behold your Savior comes, and leap ye lame for joy.
Oh,
and MS takes both the ability to leap and also to speak, like a slow. It was clear that certain diseases can take our ability to speak, and it was between us. And so that poignant connection to think over centuries, people have been imagining the Christian hope in terms of being able to express the things that we can't express because of our limited, frail bodies. I had other ones. I mean, in that little church up in Siloam Springs that Ardell and I came into the Episcopal Church through, little church with a phenomenal music, phenomenal choir, about a third of the congregation
really
choir, and wonderful organist from the college there. And Ardell had sung in plenty of choirs. I had never sung in a choir. I liked to sing around with people, but never done that. And we sang at one point, like as a heart desireth the water brook, Herbert Howells, which is not a song. It's a 20th century piece that is hauntingly beautiful with difficult chords. And, I had to sit by my tenor friend and learn my part, but it felt like I was moving into this mysterious place from the inside that I've never been in before with these people. And kind of like you, Heidi, being in those people, it's among people singing harmonies and what you feel like you're being carried into this realm. Yours was very familiar and went very deep. This particular one was unfamiliar in a way that I just wanted more of it. And I wanted to, it was as if I was just starting to learn a language that all of these other people knew that described this country I'd never seen. It was a deeply spiritual experience.
I like how you used the word haunting there, because a few weeks, was it just last week, when we were talking about thin places a little bit, and how sometimes there's this, almost this dread or just some knowledge of the supernatural. I think that, sometimes when we're in groups, people or things or events or places from the past can be much closer through an avenue like music. I mean, because of memories or because of something I can't quite explain. But
yeah, I think that's so important. And it's haunting. It's not just pretty. Again, back to this idea that music carrying more than just what is lovely. In fact, I think about in Memphis, we think about the blues is another tradition that intentionally goes to heartbreak, to dysfunction. We're going to sing about it. We're going to tell it as straight as we can. And something in this process of Cindy Mosley, a musician, says, music and concerts have been called going to church by many. She says in the chat over here. I feel like that's got to be part of the reason. It's a way humans take the hard stuff and the joyful stuff and try and kind of process it.
Yeah. Speaking of the blues, it reminds me of our musician coming up with Kirk. Scott knows I Googled him yesterday, and he's just such a unique combination of faith and gospel. He's a treasure, really. And it's such an old his family too, with all his family being connected here.
He is. In fact, another transformative experience of music for me was being in Crosstown Concourse just a few years ago. And Kirk and John Kilzer sang "I Will Always Love You." John sang it and played acoustic guitar, and Kirk was on saxophone next to him. Of course, if y'all don't know, when Whitney Houston, I guess it was it's still maybe the best-selling single by a woman, Wikipedia says, but Kirk did the solo. But in the intimacy of that room, and John Kilzer, whom we lost the year after that, more than Dolly or Whitney, for me, all of a sudden, that song felt, there was just a spiritual depth to it, to actually the miracle that one human being ever promises to another one for whatever reason. I'll always love you.
And he has another one called "Falling in Love with Jesus." And I thought, oh my gosh, am I ready to hear this thing? But I went on and listened to it. It is so wonderful. Falling in love with Jesus is the best thing I've ever done. And I read an article about him where he said, I'm not a gospel artist. I'm a person of faith who happens to be a musician. And it's his, he was raised with a whole family of preachers, and he's just, I just am so excited about this week with him on Wednesday and Wednesday night.
That's an interesting question about music that you've mentioned. Sometimes we want to put music into genres, and there are genres that are Christian, that are labeled as Christian. And Kirk and some others don't want to be confined by that label, even if they want us to realize that their faith is a huge part of who they are and is at the center of who they are. I don't know. I'm just thinking about that this moment. I wonder if there's something in that for all of us, whether we're musicians or not, to figure out what does it mean to blur the lines between my faith life, my Christian life, and my secular life, my weekday. Maybe musicians. I don't know.
Well, for Kirk too, he in the video that you shared with us, he talks about the global influences on his music, and how I think he's still evolving and still listening to that. And one thing I love about jazz, it's so improvisational. He talked about when he was first in the jazz band. He said they would play for a while, and then there was an expectation. Okay, you don't have sheet music anymore. You play whatever's in your heart, whatever's touching you right now. And there's something powerful about that. I remember a story about Miles Davis that he when his group would sing or play, 5 seconds before the show, he would say, we always start this number in C sharp. Today, let's start it in B flat. and the musicians their chins would fall to the floor. How in the world are we going to do that? He said, 1, 2, 3. And they do it. He said, we had the best music because they had to be on their toes and changing it to this key. And they all had to listen to one another, riff off each other in a new way they had not done before. And it was just really powerful. And when I think of Kirk, I think too of how his theology, what he says and what he shares. I felt like last time he was really dealing with his grief for John. And it was that experience of both music and his words were almost like a little mini funeral for himself, dealing with that, but also giving us hope in the midst of that. And it was just giving himself that. And he was in the moment of what that was doing with him and conveying it to us, which was really powerful.
Yeah, that's wonderful to think about improv as the improvisational artists as showing us how to live in a risky world, in rather than controlling it all, and in relationship. What you're describing, Paul, is both. It's one thing if Miles Davis says, "Okay, go do something in a different key,"
right?
But he's saying we're all going to be doing this together.
Yeah,
and it's going to require a certain kind of attention for you to be part of this community in this moment.
I was just thinking of the connection between music and musicians and poets, the people who are constantly seeking meaning and creation. I think just to get back in front of the blank page, in front of just looking at your instrument, and each time is this sort of unique interaction, that how important those people are to our society.
Yeah, and many of them speak in terms of these particular gifts not being something they can just summon at will. Both poets, I once heard Christian Whalum once told me that he said, I can grind out an essay. I can grind out the prose. But part of his spiritual autobiography, he went 4 years. He was editor of Poetry magazine, and he went 4 years, I think it was, without writing a single poem. It just didn't come. And that seems like one of the things that's unique about these people, the humility that something's being required, that I be open to something more than that I wrestle something into submission.
Right. And then also that you would be, I think, touched in some way by a spiritual force.
Yeah.
As well. Being open to that, some sort of spiritual force.
Yeah, even atheistic poets and songwriters will speak in very otherworldly terms when they talk about inspiration. Things I can't quite explain to you how this song came to me, how this poem began to unfold. It doesn't quite add up. And Chris Wyman would say that. He's insists that that all poets are transcendent, whether they want to admit it or not. Zeta says James Taylor's helped her through many painful and joyous times.
Oh.
Fire and rain, right,
too.
Zeta? And when the church begins organ begins while I'm sitting in the church, I'm home. Very powerful. Oh, I love that. We had a vestry retreat yesterday afternoon.
Oh yeah.
And one of the things Kat Gordon had us listing were norms and that describe Calvary for us. And a norm being a very specific thing that people you observe them doing. And somebody said, a bunch of people stay seated for the postlude, and they clap.
Yeah.
Rather than the postlude only being, some people move on out and start visiting, but rather than it only being kind of background music for the exit, people were naming this kind of attention that we pay in church as part of our liturgy. Resonate? Any other moment? Any other ones like that?
This is more of a segue, but Kristen Lynch shared a few of her chapters of her thesis with me, mostly just to edit typos and stuff. But I got caught up in what she was doing about Studerman and what she does in selecting these pieces, say postlude, prelude. I particularly remember the postlude, and she pointed out that often they were in the musicians called them marching songs, in other words, something that gets you up, gets you out. But also, I've noticed, I too, when there's a solo at the end, I just sit right. I usually stand as close to that organ as I can and watch her feet and her hands. And one of the glories of Zoom lately has been seeing her on the camera with her back to us, and all the just fascinating. But we probably should publish portions of that essay, because I don't think you'll ever go to church and hear the music, but after you read what Kristen wrote, it's their choices. It's not just their ability to play; it's what they play.
Yes. That's very helpful, Mimsy. That is a huge. So, Kristen's, for those of you who are listening and might not know, Kristen's doctoral dissertation is on longtime organist choirmaster here at Calvary, Adolf Studerman, and she really did want to go in to his repertoire and say, what were the choices he made? What did we play, and why did we play it at that time? This is a. I'm really glad you bring the sense of curation that a church musician or any musician is so essential. There's not just, Kristen never just drops something in. She knows the reading.
No, never.
She knows the liturgy. She knows the season of the year, and pulls every Sunday after Sunday. And so I love that you named that. That's what's her fascination with her predecessor. How did he do that? What associations did he make? How did he actually attend to the spiritual life of Calvary's people by the choices of what they would sing?
Well, I like, Mimsy, that you mentioned that, like, marching out music, and we haven't really touched on sort of how music affects us physically. I like it when sometimes in church you see people kind of bobbing because they feel the rhythm, or me in a grocery store, I admit, I hear a song and I'm kind of getting my things into my cart with this movement, or there are just some pieces of music that, like, can't just be taken in by our emotions or our thoughts, but we have to move our bodies to them because they come into us somehow, and in joyful or otherwise ways. I like how they can affect any age group. Any person can be sometime accosted by a rhythm or some chords or whatever it is.
Yeah. I've never heard September by Earth, Wind and Fire and not felt better afterwards, even if I felt great before it.
And you dance. I bet you do a little dance to it.
Only if I can listen.
Only
Couple other comments here. Music is evoking so much for Carrington. It's beyond articulation. That is what we're talking about, things beyond articulation, aren't we? Tapped into my heart and my gut. Yeah, those are great language around what we're trying to get at. The service as a whole is theater, and music for me pulls it all together.
Isn't that what was it Kierkegaard said that, and that God is our audience? We're the performers, and God is the audience. I mean, God is the audience. We're not the audience. We're part of the liturgy, and we're performing for God when we are in church.
Yeah, we can say these things in ways. Our liturgy gives us space to say this, not in dismissive ways. That there is an element of performance, an element of stepping up and bringing this best self or this other self with other people in these forms to God. Madge grew up in Adolph's choir. Lovely. Flooded by memories of both the discipline and the love of music those 10 years instilled in me. That's a great combination there. Love and discipline are not mutually exclusive. There can be a attentiveness. This is something I'm going to say out loud about Kristen's choir too. Their musicianship and heart or musicality are not the same thing. There are technically wonderful musicians that are technically remarkable and proficient, and there are also musicians that know when not to play a note, know when to pull back.
Yes.
And with a church musician, there are musicians who know how to cultivate a spiritual community, a Christian community in their singing. And Kristen is one of those. Not everybody can see it from out in the nave, but when she finishes when our choir finishes an anthem, she pauses oftentimes and puts her hand to her heart when something has happened. You probably can tell it's happening, and it's moving to me to have these little acknowledgments that yes, we practiced, yes, we rehearsed, yes, we picked a great piece for this moment, but it just happened. It just came together, and all of you were present for it. What a gift! What a gift our music is at Calvary. It is good to just have the four of. I mean, it's good for me to, with you three, stammer around about why it is important to us. Try to articulate why it is that, as Augustine said, the one who sings prays twice.
Yes.
Why does it add this entirely other dimension to our lives, and maybe an expression of some gratitude. So friends, come. Don't miss Kirk Whalum on Wednesday. Don't miss him on Wednesday night. We will be live streaming from the church with Kirk, not with Micah on Friday. But so you if you're comfortable with that, you're welcome to sign up for in-person worship on Wednesday noon and Wednesday at 6:30. But otherwise, put your good speakers hooked up to your laptop and let Kirk transport you.
And maybe you can dance a little bit in your own home living room.
Yeah, that's right. If you're self-conscious like some of us. All right, friends. Thanks. This was really enjoyable, and thanks to all of you who were listening in and inserting your comments and reminding us how this is a part of all our lives. All right, we'll see you at church. Sing aloud.